Hi there everyone, it's Jo from joblackman.com. I'm here today with another Stampin' Society project tutorial for you. Our subject this month was out of our comfort zone. Now this is a really hard subject for a lot of us because we often refer to things being outside of our comfort zone, but when it actually comes down to thinking of something to actually demonstrate, it was actually really hard because I didn't know whether to go for a technique which is a little bit out of my comfort zone or whether to go for something else. Now what I've decided to go for is purples. Now I really struggle with purples. I don't know why, because it's not that I don't like them. I actually do really like purples. I just really struggle with them in craft, and I really can't pinpoint why, but it's a colour I very, very rarely use. So it's quite interesting for me to sort of step out of my comfort zone just a little bit and see what I could make for you. So I'm using two stamp sets. I'm using Stacked Stone, which is one of our background stamps, and Quiet Meadow. So I wanted to use the Stacked Stone because it's one of these that's been sitting on my shelf for a long while. I use it for various techniques, but not actually use it straight for its sort of background really. So I thought it was a good one to dig out for this subject. And also I just love these little flowers here in the Quiet Meadow. So I thought it'd be two nice stamp sets to kind of use with you. So I'm in the UK, as I say, so I'm going to be giving you measurements in both imperial and in metric, just because obviously I need to appeal to both markets, and it's easier for me to explain them to you as I'm going through them. So I'm going to do that as well. So bear with me. If I miss one, there will be in the tutorial, the imperials will be in the tutorial, and you can always message me, but fingers crossed we won't forget anything. So we're going to start off with our card base. As I say, this is Gorgeous Grape, so it's quite a deep purple. I don't dislike it, so I don't know why I struggle with it so much in my crafting, but I really, really do. And I've got 2 or 3 ladies that actually love purple, so they can't get their head around it either. But here we go. We're all different, aren't we? I'm more blues and greens sort of colours, really. So this is our standard card. Now in the UK, this measures 14.85 by 21 centimetres, and I've scored it at 10.5 to give us our card. Now if you are working in imperial, yours will be 8.5 inches by 11 inches and scored at 4.25, so it's just your standard size card. I then have a layer of fresh freesia. Now this tone of purple I absolutely love. I don't know whether it's because it's more pastel, but I do really love this one. So this one can stay. So this one measures 13.7 centimetres by 9.2 centimetres, or 5 inches by 3.75 inches. I then have a piece of basic white, which we're just going to layer on top of that. And that one measures 13.35 centimetres by 9 centimetres, or 4 7/8 of an inch by 3 5/8 of an inch. And then one final piece of basic white. So this is all for our background, and then we're going to be stamping as well. So this one measures, in the UK, it is 12.85 centimetres by 4 centimetres, and in imperial, it's 4 3/4 by 1 3/4. So they're just our base layers, and it's this small strip here that we're going to be using to actually do our stacked stone background. So I'm going to grab my stamp. Now normally I would grab my stamp apparatus to do this. I haven't got it here to hand at the moment, so I'm just going to lay my stamp down on my mat here. Now these stamps are extremely large, and although we do have a block that is big enough for these, it's actually really quite difficult to handle. So I would always normally use my stamp apparatus for this, just because it makes it so much easier. As I say, I haven't got it to hand tonight, so we're just going to use the good old-fashioned flat on the desk technique tonight. So the first thing I want to do is to grab my Versamark ink pad. And I also need my Gorgeous Grape ink pad. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to ink through the sort of the middle of it here. I'm going to ink more than I need. because I want to make sure that I'm getting a nice covering onto my strip here. So I'm just going up the middle. This is a brand new Versamark ink pad, so it's all nice and juicy, as you can probably see. I'm then going to go straight over, so I've not done any stamping, and I'm going straight over with my gorgeous grape ink pad. Just close that up so I don't get it anywhere. I'm then going to take my strip of card and I'm going to very carefully just lay this down onto my stacked stone background. You can either use a block, as I just did there, just to run over the top, or if you prefer, you can just grab yourself a bit of paper, just rub over the top, and it just saves you having to hold that massive great block in your hand and really struggle with it. So I'm going to carefully lift this off. I will clean my stamp once we've finished. Oops. Okay, now because I used Versamark on this, it's actually going to have a shiny surface still. So I'm going to use clear embossing powder, and I'm just going to sprinkle it all over the top of my stamped background here. Just tap it off. Pop it back into my pot. And I'm just going to heat that through very quickly. You can see it's just starting to change colour. Okay, so I'm just going to allow that just to cool down just very slightly for a moment whilst I get my papers together. This is an old packing list from my last order, so it's just handy for scrap paper. So just very quickly had a quick sip of drink and get a really dry throat when we're demonstrating. And I'm going to take a bit of sponge. Now what I want to do is I want to add some additional colour into these three sides. I purposely kept this quite light in the centre because I wanted that to be my centre point. And I'm going to colour around these edges. But before I do so, I just wanted to explain to you what I did there with the Versamark. Because the Versamark has got glycerine in it, it will remain sort of like tacky. If you've ever used Versamark, it's like a real sticky sort of substance. And just by using that prior to using my colour, it means I can use clear embossing powder, and that way I can heat emboss in any colour I like. So any colour you've got in your collection, you can use for heat embossing. It's a really lovely technique because it kind of just means that you've got more versatility. So the basics embossing powders are a really good one to go for. And you also get white and you get black in there as well. So it's really a really useful set. So I'm just adding some colour, not in any particular depth. I'm just sort of going over the top and just seeing how it looks. And as I say, I'm going to keep this side here quite light. In fact, I'm probably not going to touch it at all. And it just means that I'll get like almost like a spotlight on this centre part. I'm going to bring it in a little bit more here. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that. So let's put these layers together first of all. So they're simply all stuck together with, I'm using multi-purpose glue, but you can use whichever glue you're comfortable with, entirely up to you. So I'm just going to pop this onto my left-hand side here. Just make sure you're not picking up any ink off that shiny surface. In fact, what you could do is, if you've got a kitchen towel, you could just rub over the top of it. It's just that the embossing will repel the ink, so sometimes it sits on top of the embossing itself. So this is giving it a really skinny border. I do like skinny borders of colour. So I'm not going to rub over the top of that too much because I don't want to pick up any ink. So that is the base of our card actually complete. So I think that stacked stone is such a lovely stamp, and it just gives a really lovely look no matter what colour it's in, really. It's just one of those really sort of good versatile stamps. So I'm going to put that to one side. So the next thing I want to do is to create these flowers here. So I've got my stamp from the Quiet Meadow stamp set, and I'm using Stays On. Now the reason I'm using Stays On is that I am going to be using water to do my little bit of colouring in. So I want an ink pad that's not going to bleed when I use the water. So I'm just going to stamp it on here. Whoops. And I actually want two of them because I don't know if you can see. There's actually two of them and in two different colours. So I've used Gorgeous Grape and Fresh Freesia because they are the two colours that I've used in my cardstock. Let's pop that one on there. They're such beautiful detailed stamps. They're really sort of kind of nice ones to use. So I'm going to be using Gorgeous Grape first. So I'm just going to push my ink pad together to squish and get a little bit of ink into the lid. So you can use a normal paintbrush. You can use one of our water painters if you've got those. I tend to use my little paintbrush more often than not because I like a little fine brush, but it's entirely up to you whatever you're comfortable in using. So it's just plain water, and I'm just going to mix up some of this ink. I don't want it to be too wet, so I want a nice sort of, I want it to move, but I don't want it to be really watered down. I want it to be quite rich in colour, and I'm just going to pull the colour out from the centre towards the outside of my petals. It's actually quite dark, so I am just going to add a little bit more water to that. Now I'm not using watercolour paper just because I don't need to for this small little technique. It's kind of a it's quite forgiving with just a little bit of colour going on it. They're not very wet, so it's absolutely fine. Again, I'm not using too much colour, and you can see almost one dip of my paintbrush is actually travelling across these petals quite nicely. And I'm not worried if they're different tones of colour, because all flowers and all petals are different colours. So, you know, don't be afraid to just give it a little wash over. Now, if I was doing this myself for a card, I would probably take a little bit more time just doing this part I'm sort of speeding up really for the camera, but you can take a little bit more time over this and sort of really enjoy your colouring. It's a great pastime, it's very relaxing, and I actually love watching people watercolour as well. I think it's such a nice thing to do. As you can see, where I'm rushing, I've gone over the edge a little bit there, but we're going to cut this out. You're not going to see it, so don't panic too much. I've picked up my wrong brush actually, because this is the one who the ends tend to split a little bit. So I'm just going to go for my slightly smaller one. Well, that's better. It's much better, a lot quicker. If you can feel it dragging a little bit, that's because you need a little bit more water on your brush. So just, you know, take your time. And then some of these, I'm just going to go in just in the centre. You see, I'm just sort of wiggling my brush around really, just to spread that colour in. Add a little bit more colour up here where this petal was quite dark to begin with. So it just all blends together. And also as well, when you are painting, they do dry kind of slightly lighter than what they look when you first pop it on anyway. It's like when you're painting a wall, it sort of goes on quite dark and then it will lighten as time goes on. Okay, so I'm going to take Old Olive next, and I'm going to use my Old Olive just to do all my leaves and stems. And again, you can be quite quick. Don't worry if you've got little white bits showing. It's all going to blend in together. So just spread the colour around nicely. Now there are dies that go with this stamp set. I'm not using them today because I wanted this card to be a little bit more intricate. So the dies that come with this cut the actual arrangement out beautifully, but it doesn't cut a lot of these centre pieces out, and I wanted to be able to see through that. So I have kind of done it by hand. I will show you some sort of tips and techniques for doing that as well, so we can see the whole process. I'm actually going to put just one flower on this one, because otherwise you're going to be watching me paint forever. As I say, I would generally take a lot more time over this. I'm just wanting to get this colour down so that I can show you how it all goes together. So it's just a nice wash over. It doesn't need great depth of colour. It's just a really nice sort of summery kind of look to it. And I'm actually going to add a little bit of green in the centres of these flowers. I actually used Daffodil Delight in the original one, but guess who forgot to get Daffodil Delight off her shelf? So we've gone for the green. Okay, so as I say, I would take a lot more time painting these. They're not very detailed at the moment because I haven't spent that normal time that I would. But just take your time and just enjoy the actual process. But the next thing I'm going to grab is my Winker Stella, because this just lifts everything. And it also will, if there's any little shading errors or whatever underneath, it kind of kind of hides them a little bit because you're seeing that beautiful glimmer. So again, if you haven't got a Wink of Stella brush, I highly recommend. And when they get very low, so when you're nearly running out of the beautiful shimmer that's coming from it, I tend to then use it as a paintbrush, because it's amazing, although you think it's empty, with a little bit of water and using it over your images, it kind of get that sparkle back. So it's well worth hanging on to the old ones when you think that they've finished. So as I say, I'm just going to do one this time because I want to kind of get the card finished for you. So I'm going to grab a craft knife. Now, if you're not very proficient with craft knives, or they frighten you a little bit, which a lot of people, they do, there's no need to worry about them. I would recommend using a proper scalpel blade. So there are lots of craft knives out there. We don't sell them, unfortunately. I wish we did. But this is the cheapest of cheap of cutting blades. But it's actually a Swan Martin, which is a... they do a lot of the sort of hospital blades and things like that, so the medical grade of blades. So they're really, really sharp, and they stay sharp for quite some time. But before I cut this out, I want to cut out these little pieces in the middle. Now, I am leaving a little border. I'm not going right to the edges, and I'm also not stressing about it. But can you see I've done 4 cuts basically in this little section here. I'm going to pop it out just like that. So it's a really lovely straight cut. Just take your time and let the blade do the work. So don't try and force it through the paper. Just let that blade follow the line and it will cut out beautifully for you. I think we have a tendency to kind of drag things, but if you just let it sort of find its own way, you will find that it gets a little bit of area where you've not perhaps put so much pressure on your blade. Just go over it and recut, and you'll find that it should come away nice and easy. Sometimes it gets stuck on the little join bits where you've kind of got the blades haven't quite met. And again, I'm just putting stuff through. It takes seconds really, so it's worth, sometimes if I want to really get that close cut image, then I will use a knife. But as I say, the dies are fine too. If you just want to use the dies, then that's good. And again, I'm just going to pop these out. Just leave a little slit in that one. And then I think pretty much my scissors will go around the rest of it. You can use your knife as well to cut the whole thing if you want to. That's absolutely fine too. As I say, I tend to just use my blade for the centre sections. And it's always best to cut with your knife first and then do the scissor work afterwards, because if you do the scissor work first, you can imagine you get lots of like really small pieces and it's just kind of holding on, and you really don't want to be pulling against a really fine cut section. Just cutting a little bit nearer on that end bit, that's it. And what I'm going to do as well is I'm just going to get rid of my excess, because when you have a lot of excess paper around, it just tends to get in the way. So These are a lovely new pair of scissors I've just bought, so they're lovely, lovely and sharp. But let your scissors do the work. So I'm just closing my scissors, but it's actually the paper I'm moving. So I'm not moving my scissors around these angles. I'm literally just moving the paper. And that way you get a much neater and smoother cut, especially around things like petals, which are sort of got a rounded edge on them. Some people hate fussy cutting. I actually love it. So that's not one of my out of my comfort zones. That's very much in my comfort zone. And I quite often will stamp images that I've painted, and then I sit in front of the TV and just get my scissors out and this one's a little bit tricky because some of the petals overlap each other, so you can't always see where you're cutting, so you do need to be a little bit extra careful. And especially with me being on camera, it does make it quite difficult sometimes to see over the top. So I'm doing my best while we're on camera. And I have just spotted another area that I really do need to use a knife on. So I'm just going to finish this little piece here. I'm going to snip that off and just bring my little cutting mat back in. So can you see all this section in here? This isn't going to, I'm not going to get my scissors in here. So again, I'm just going to cut away. This is where my cuts haven't quite met here. So, okay, so I've just cut that little bit out as well. Let's carry on just cutting this through. Nearly there. It's funny how we all have our favourite colours and colours which perhaps we wouldn't wear or don't like to see. I wouldn't say there's any colours I don't like entirely. It's just crafting with purple is just a struggle for me. There we go. Okay. So that's my flowers cut out. So as I say, all I've done, there's one there, and then this is the other one I've kind of cut into pieces. So I would have cut it kind of around here and had this one longer, and I've just kind of arranged it in a little arrangement. So that's the only difference with this one we're going to be doing today. I'm just going to be using a single one purely for speed. So I want to turn this over, and I'm going to grab myself some dimensionals. So I'm going to need to cut these up because I haven't got any of the small ones at the moment. I seem to go through those a lot quicker than I do these. So I'm just cutting these into pieces. and just placing them on the bigger areas on the back of my stamped image, like here, for example. I just need a little bit of support, so I'm going to put a couple on here and then a couple down here. Just need to cut that one again. Whenever I get a new pair of scissors, I always say I'm not going to use them for this sort of thing, but it doesn't take long before you start using them. I do try and keep a spare pair for ribbon, but I say it doesn't always come off. And then just one last piece, I think, onto this section here. Okay. Whoops. Okay, so I think that's all of my back ends. It's actually sticking to my finger. And before I do anything else, I'm going to pop this onto my card so that it is stuck where I want it to be. I'm then just going to grab a little bit of linen thread. This is another one that I always love to have in my box because it's so versatile for all sorts of things. And I'm just going to make a couple of loops and just slide it on the bottom there. Whoops. What I'm going to do is put a little bit of glue on that end section in a moment. Now, I should do this first. I always, when I'm tying a bow directly onto my card, I always tend to tie it upside down. I don't know why, but it always looks better when I tie it upside down. And if you don't believe me, try it because it really does make a difference. I'm just going to pull the ends just to make it a nice sort of smallish bow. Trim those off. So I'm just going to add a tiny bit of glue just to the very end of my bouquet here and just rest it down. So it's naturally going to fall down into sort of a kind of a slope, if you will. Okay, so as I've only got one flower on this, I'm going to add a few little gems just to add a little bit of interest. Love diamantes. Okay, so the last thing left for me to do is this little greeting here. So again, I've just got a little piece of offcut of my gorgeous grape. And I've just got my dust buddy bag here just to make sure I've got no fingerprints on here. And I guess who've got to get the greeting out of the stamp set. So bear with me one moment. Let me just grab that quickly. What did I put? You're too kind. Shall we have you thinking of you this time? It's quite a nice sentiment. So again, I'm using my Versamark ink pad. Incidentally, on this stamp set, there are little pieces of the words sometimes missing, like a little part on the G here. I spent ages thinking I had a 40 stamp before I realised. So it's just keep a watch when you're doing things like that, in case it's actually part of the stamp. So I'm just using white embossing powder this time. Whoops, came out a bit heavy. And because I used that dust body, I'm not getting any embossing powder anywhere I don't want it, which is brilliant. So let me just heat that up. Okay, and I think this time I'm going to cut around my greeting. I like to do sort of these banners, but I also really like a cut out image. So I'm just going to follow the line of the words. And again, using that move the paper, not your scissors technique. I love cutting around the greetings, especially when you've got these sort of shapes of the dots, they're quite large, and the towels of the letters and everything. I always think it looks really nice. There we go. So that's going to be our little greeting. So I can pop it here or pop it here. Actually, I quite like it there. So that's where it's going to go. Again, I'm just using a little bit of multi-purpose glue. Adhesive sheets are actually really good for that. If you stick a bit of adhesive sheet on the back of the actual piece of card before you start embossing and stuff, it kind of really makes that easy. So let's clear the decks a little bit, and then we can have another look at the cards. So as you can see, you can probably see that, well, the shine from the actual embossed stacked stone, but you can also see that beautiful shimmer on our flowers as well. So there's two slight different versions of that. Process was exactly the same, just the cards were just very slightly different, but that's all. So I hope you like that. That's, as I say, a little bit out of my comfort zone. I do quite like the finished article, but I would still like to see it in a different colour. So it was definitely still remain out of my comfort zone, but I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you'll have a go. Thanks very much. See you later. Bye.